Here we have topic 3, interdependent relationships in ecosystems. Once again, you'll see the standards are listed. Make sure that when you read through the standards, you understand what they're asking for, because most likely that is going to be how they write the questions on the exam. It says use mathematical representations to support explanations about biotic and abiotic factors that affect carrying capacity. You want to make sure you know all the vocabulary within those standards as well. Mathematical means that they're going to give you a data table or they're going to give you some sort of graph that you will have to analyze. First thing we have is definition for carrying capacity. Whenever I think about capacity, capacity means the max number. Like capacity for an auditorium, a capacity for an amusement park. Capacity, simple word, just means max number. A lot of the questions on the test, as much as people will say the answers are in the reading, it has to do with reading comprehension, the background knowledge is going to be really important so that you can tackle those questions. If you don't have the background knowledge, the questions will be even more challenging. All right, limit to the number of organisms in a population that an ecosystem can support. Limiting factors keep population sizes in check, aka they limit the population. Limiting factors include any finite or biotic or abiotic resource. So over here we have that word finite. You know the word infinite? Infinite means unlimited. It can go on and on and on. Right? Infinite. Here we have finite. It's the same root there, right? But we've taken off the in. So finite just means limited. There's only so much food. There's only so much water. There's only so much space. When I see abiotic, and again, in one of the other videos that I did, I said whenever I see an A, I circle it and I know that that's going to negate it. So abiotic means non, and then biotic means living. So abiotic is non-living, whereas biotic means living. If these words are in a passage and they're giving you a hard time, take a second, break them apart, and then switch them out to non-living and living. It'll make your life a lot easier. Abiotic things are boundaries. You could also think space. Here they said climate and then water. Climate would be like how much rain there is, how hot it is, right? Like temperature. Water is obviously referring to water, how much water is accessible to the person or to the organism. You also could think about carbon dioxide. You could think about oxygen, the nutrients in the soil, which would be things like nitrogen. Biotic are going to be all the living things. So here we have food, competition for food, competition for space, right? You're fighting with other organisms that maybe want the same exact space that you have. They want the same exact food that you have. Predation would be another one. So predators come and they keep your numbers in check. And then finally we have disease, right? Disease is going to be obviously like a bacteria or a virus or a fungus that winds up killing off a lot of organisms. Another one that we could have is human-induced changes, and these could fit in either one of the abiotic or biotic factors, depending upon how you're looking at it. Over here we have that word anthropogenic. Remember, anthro is referring to human. So anthropogenic. Again, another vocab word that if you don't know what it means, it's really going to limit your ability to answer the questions. So anthro always is referring to human. Things that could be anthropogenic would be urban development, burning fossil fuels, and there's no way I could go over every single example. What you're going to have to do is read through the passage and figure out, okay, is this something abiotic? Is it something biotic? Are the humans doing it? And how is it affecting the carrying capacity? Finite resources affect the abundance. Abundance means number of individuals of a species in any given ecosystem. Over here we have the graph. This is the carrying capacity graph. You want to make sure that you know how to analyze it. First thing is I've got this dotted line here. Label, 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 label. This is my carrying capacity. And remember, carrying capacity means max number. What you might see in this graph is like, oh my goodness, it goes a little bit above and a little bit below. I thought you said that was the max. Why is it above? Any time of year, there's going to be seasonal changes. Right now, here in New York, we're in the springtime. In the spring, the trees have lots of leaves on them. The grass is really green. All the mammals just had their babies. So there's baby bunnies, right? There's going to be baby deer. There's just a lot more organisms. Think about once we transition though, spring, summer. Summer, it winds up being a little bit of a drought. After that, you could have much colder weather. When it's colder, it's hard to find food. It's hard to find water. And then that's going to decrease the number of organisms. A lot of organisms are going to die off. So now this is a word that I know sometimes people struggle with, but that up and down, that's going to be called fluctuate, right? Fluctuations or fluctuate. So here, all those dots, we have graph fluctuates. And again, that's a word sometimes we have a hard time with. That just means goes up and down, up and down. And a lot of times this could be, now this is not the only reason, but this could be seasonal changes. The weather changes, the food available changes, the competition. So we have, like in the spring, baby animals, and then we also have lots of food and water. But then in the winter, we have less food, and that means the sick and the old die. Now they don't give you a time frame here, so that time frame could be short, it could be large. You don't know. Keep in mind, again, if they ask anything about quantitative, you want to make sure you have numbers. Note here, there are no numbers, so they wouldn't be able to give you any sort of question asking about quantitative data. Here's some examples. It says a forest supports 500 deer when food, water, and space are abundant. Abundant just means more than enough. A drought reduces. Reduces is a word sometimes we have a hard time with. That just means decreases. Oh, and vegetation, if you don't know what vegetation means. So here we have decreases. And vegetation just means plants. By 40%, lowering the carrying capacity of deer to 300. This could be another reason why it would fluctuate, right? Like, oh man, there was a drought, now there's not as much grass. Sometimes we see that midsummer here where I live in the July, August, not enough rain. Not enough rain means the grass looks brown and gross, and there's just not as much food then for the organisms. Overpopulation to 600 deer leads to overgrazing. Overgrazing meaning eating too much of the grass. That reduces the food availability and increases mortality rates. Mortality just means death. Now, the next section is talking about, again, mathematical representations. There's probably going to be some sort of graph. You're going to have to use a graph in order to help you. We have a few different words. Biodiversity we need to know. And then it talks about different scales. They'll provide that to you in the reading. Biodiversity, anytime I see something like this, again, I divvy it up. I've got bio. Bio means life or living. Diversity means different. So we're talking about a number of different things living in an area. The more biodiversity, the more stable it is. You need biodiversity. They might give you some sort of question where they're talking about a keystone species. Keystone species is the species that keep all the other species in check. They wind up dying, and then what happens to the number of organisms at different trophic levels? That's on the next page, so we'll dive into a little bit more there. The local versus global scale. Local people cut down trees in a town to build houses. Birds now have nowhere to live, which reduces the biodiversity in the town. Global climate change changes weather patterns. This leads to new bird migration routes, which reduces biodiversity in areas affected by climate change. Biodiversity is increased by the formation of new species, which is called speciation, and decreased by the loss of species, which is extinction. Now moving on to those keystone and trophic cascade. This has been on at least 2 of the 3 Regents exams that have been released so far. Keystone species is a species that has a really big impact on the entire ecosystem. So if it dies, many other things will wind up dying. Keystone species that I looked at with my class was the sea stars. There was a video on it that we watched from BioInteractive, and it showed that how when you killed the sea stars off, it wound up having a negative effect on all the other organisms, because then the things that the sea stars ate wound up growing out of control, and then nothing else could live in that area. So keystone species. Another example that everyone is familiar with, even if you were not in my class, are bees. Bees buzz around on different types of plants. When they go to the plants, they get pollen on them, right? And then they move to another plant and they distribute the pollen that was on them accidentally to other plants in order to allow for fruits and vegetable, right, those plants to be fertilized. People rely on this, so therefore they can have food. If bees disappear, which is a problem that actually is occurring, many people would maybe not have enough food because their plants would not grow and reproduce as they should. And that would affect the whole food web, not just humans. Because if you've ever tried to plant a garden before, you most likely know that humans are not the only ones that are eating the delicious vegetables and fruit that are located inside of your home garden. The other thing we have is called a trophic cascade. This is in direct connection with that keystone species. Trophic, remember we already said trophic in another video, means feeding. Keep replacing those words to help you so you can know what they mean. It says a chain reaction in a food web where changes at the top cause big changes all the way down. You could think about this like a domino effect. At some point, maybe, you've had a lot of dominoes. You've stacked them all up next to each other. When you go and you knock down one, that entire line of dominoes is going to fall. That's what a trophic cascade is, right? When one species falls, the other species are going to fall. Now over here, we have a couple different disturbances. They could give you any disturbance. I don't know what they're going to give you. I just have a few examples so that we could be maybe more familiar with a low disturbance and a high disturbance. A forest fire, in the state lab, they talk about how the Carner butterfly, which is in the Albany pine bush, relies on there not being big trees, right? Everything has to be low vegetation. So they do controlled burns, where they burn off all of the larger trees and then only the smaller things are left. That increases the number of plants that the Carner blue butterfly rely on, and then it also makes it so that larger forest fires don't occur. Those are controlled burns. Scientists are there, they're making sure things are going how they want them to go. A high disturbance would be a severe wildfire. Maybe someone has a campfire or someone like flicks out a cigarette and it's really dry, especially out in California or maybe some areas of Canada, and a wildfire explodes, and it's very hard. It takes weeks in order to get it under control. This can destroy thousands of acres. That's going to be much more detrimental, right, or bad for the environment. It says it destroys canopy cover. Canopy cover is referring to the fact that if you've ever been on a hike, let's say in a wooded area, you'll notice that in the spring and summer, there are lots of trees that have their leaves, and those create a lot of shade. That's what the canopy cover is. When there's a big fire as well, that's going to have an effect on the soil, right? The nutrients in the soil, the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen, and the nitrogen. It can take a really long time for that forest to regain or reestablish itself through ecological succession. We'll talk a little bit about ecological succession on the next page. Ecological change in this case, loss of habitat. Habitat is where the animals live. So they used to live in that forest, but now it no longer exists. We have soil erosion. I know a few people didn't really know what erosion meant. Erosion is wearing away. And I know I've had people say, well, that's more of like an earth science thing. But erosion, right, when two things rub together, that could be like erosion. Erosion, if you live by an ocean and you think about the waves coming up and then bringing in some of the sand back into the ocean and the shoreline keeps moving further and further up, that's erosion. So erosion is just the wearing away. And then we have long-term shifts in species. We also have human development in the wetlands, two different examples. One, a boardwalk trail is built with minimal land disruption. If you've ever been maybe to a state park before and there's a little bit of a stream and someone's put a boardwalk on over the stream so you can continue your hike, that would be low disturbance. The animals can still move as they would need to move and it doesn't really affect them. High disturbance is, let's say in Florida, they drain all the wetlands, so therefore they can either build new houses or they could farm. That is anything that was living there in the aquatic environment. Aquatic could be ocean, lake, wetland in this case. That whole food web has been destroyed. You reduce or lose biodiversity, and then you have an increased flooding risk. So certain areas that used to be wetlands, they drained, but now every time it rains or there's like a big hurricane, they reflood. The last disturbance we have here is habitat fragmentation. They did mention this on two of the regions. A process when habitat is transformed into a number of patches into a smaller area isolated from one another. If you flip to page 14 of this packet, there's a model. Low disturbance is trails being built. High disturbance, urban development, highways, new homes, and businesses. This could collapse food webs due to trophic cascade, loss of biodiversity, reduction in habitat quality, and loss of habitat area. Over here we have ecosystems can shift dramatically when environmental stress exceeds the resilience threshold. Resilience means like you can get back to normal. You can overcome that. Right? Someone who's resilient can overcome. First example we have is ecological succession. You get a mature forest. Notice here, this barren land, this is going to be what we consider the least stable. And then given a very long time period, now they don't say that here, but this is supposed to be like 100+ years. The hardwood forest is going to be considered the most stable. And that's because you've got the most biodiversity there. Disturbance, what causes this? It could be a wildfire, it could be logging. Once you start destroying this, you reset back to the bare field. When you go to the bare field, the soil in the bare field is really, really thin. If you learned about the Dust Bowl, right, that was when there was a lot of soil erosion that was occurring. There was wind. There was nothing to anchor that soil down. And therefore, you got rid of all the nutrients in the soil. Remember, the nutrients in the soil are not food. They are the elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. And as time goes on, this bare field, grass winds up growing, The grass dies. When it dies, the decomposers recycle the dead grass. Here are the shrubs. Some of those are going to die or their leaves fall off, and then those get recycled back into the soil. Think about the pine needles. The pine needles all fall on the ground, and then the decomposers go and they recycle. And that makes the soil more and more suitable for bigger and bigger plants. So recycled, dead, sorry it's a little messy, organic material. Making soil better for large vegetation. I'm just going to write down trees, but vegetation and trees are the same. The other thing we have is grassland to desert transition. Disturbance, overgrazing, and drought in Africa have led to desertification. Soil erosion and loss of seed banks prevent recovery. Soil erosion, again, that's like there's no nutrients within that soil. And if you do try to plant anything, it just cannot establish the roots that it needs to because those plants are unable to get all of those nutrients from the soil in order to allow them to grow really well. It says new ecosystem. When plant cover is lost, the ecosystem can no longer support the same organisms. This system transitions from grassland to desert with fewer species and lower productivity. Right, overgrazing and soil erosion. I'm just going to write this on the side. But these leads to less nutrients in the soil, so plants can't grow. Now moving further down, we have designing a solution. They can give you anything for this. I do not know what they will give you, but you will have to use your best strategies in order to answer the questions. The biggest thing is knowing what a constraint is, knowing what a criteria is, and then using whatever data they give you in order to answer the questions. Solutions for reducing impacts of human activities on the environment and biodiversity. You need to consider all of the constraints. Know the word constraint. I always tell my kids it's a limitation. These can include cost. Cost is a big one. Like a limit is always going to be the cost. People are not giving you unlimited money. Safety. So they want to make sure the people working on this solution are safe, but also that it's safe for the community as well. Reliability. Will it work every time? Aesthetics. Most of us know what aesthetics mean, right? Like a specific aesthetic, but that's going to be a look. Believe it or not, maybe you think that what the town wants to build, even though it could be really helpful for the animals and the plants, maybe it's ugly. And people come out and they complain because it's ugly. We also have social, cultural, and environmental impacts. I mean, social, cultural could be things even like how much tourism is coming into the area because of the solution that you're building. So therefore, maybe it's not a good solution because you're relying on tourists, and when you go and you put in this new solution, tourists don't want to come to your area anymore. It says, evaluate potential solutions for maintaining stability, considering the trade-off. Definitely need to know that word. A trade-off just means a pro and a con. Any question that has to do with a solution, read very carefully. Usually, you need to write down multiple parts in order to get one point. So make sure that when you read through it, if it says you need to mention safety, reliability, and aesthetics, you need all three of those to get 1 point. Put a little check mark next to each one after you've answered it. So you're like, okay, I've got my cost. Now I'm writing about my safety. Now I'm writing about my reliability. Now over here, I have adverse impacts of anthropogenic changes. When I see that anthro, I remember human. Adverse, do we know what that means? If you don't, it means negative. If you're having a hard time with the definitions for the everyday words, not the science words like adverse, make a few flashcards. Go over the words. It's going to help you go through the reading comprehension questions and the passages a lot easier. So if you see a word in here you don't know, you got to go memorize it. So we have urbanization is the first one. Urbanization is habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, pollution, overexploitation. An example of that, my students, we talked about the ivory from the elephants and how they were killing the elephants in order to get their tusks to get the ivory. Right? We exploited those elephants. And now there are less elephants, and even with that, there are less elephants that have tusks. You could over-farm, over-harvest, all of those. Over here, we have our habitat fragmentation, where they build a highway. When you build a highway, you make it so therefore there is not as much space for the organisms. You might think, it doesn't look like it really had that big of an effect. But one thing that you want to look at that they haven't actually tested on, but maybe they will. But when you split up a habitat, this is like deep inside of a forest. When you go and you make a highway, you make it so there's not as much deep forest. There's a lot of stuff on the edges. This is called the edge effect. If you've ever driven on a highway, which I'm thinking most of us have, but you will notice that right along the edge, it's normally going to be warmer. Like, so in the winter, if you live in upstate New York, which is where I live, and you're going down like the Northway or the Thruway, what you might notice is that right on the edges, there really is no snow. Why is that? That's because it's so much hotter in that area because the cars are burning all the fossil fuels, and that makes the environment right there much, much warmer than it would be right in this center portion. So normally the edge effect is that it's drier, hotter, and you wind up with less biodiversity. Solutions are to create urban parks and nature preserves, enforce emission standards, and promote public transit. And obviously, if you live in the city, there's a lot of public transit. But if you live in more rural areas, they don't have any public transit, and you have to drive everywhere yourself. Encourage water conservation, energy efficiency, and recycling programs. Big things are always like reduce, reuse, recycle. I don't think those are going to be answers you can provide because you're going to have to look in the reading in order to find the answers. Next up, we have building dams. When you build a dam, you alter the river ecosystem, you block fish migration, changes sediment flow and water temperature. Sediments are like tiny stones, sands, things like that that are inside of the water. I know what you're thinking. Sediment sounds like earth science. Correct. But remember, a lot of the standards are smushed together, so we are covering some earth science. So sediment, you can think about, sand, stone. When you're in a river, the river is flowing. Some of those smaller stones and sands get picked up and they get moved to other areas. Think about if you've been to the ocean before, right? It's salty, the sand gets all moved around. That's what we're talking about when we say sediment flow. So building dams, solutions could be help migratory species like salmon navigate around dams, eco-friendly dam design, incorporate environmental flow releases to mimic natural river conditions, and also alternate energy. Invest in solar and wind power. You might see these used as renewable. Building dams, this is hydropower. Remember, hydro means water from one of the sphere things that we did earlier. Last two, we've got dissemination. Dissemination is referring to the spreading. Like when you disseminate information, you spread information. But now we're spreading invasive species. Invasive species are species that are not supposed to be in this area, but we have wound up taking them from other areas. Think about the lanternfly down in New York City, Long Island. Or you could think up here, we recently had that spongy moth that ate all of the leaves off of the trees about 3 years ago. The trees were able to not be killed off by that, but those are all examples of invasive species. The stink bug, that's another invasive species that is in this area, and they almost always outcompete native species, which are species that are supposed to live here or naturally live here, and now we've disrupted their food webs. Things we could do: monitor ecosystems, act quickly to remove them, inform people not to be releasing pets and plants into the wild. Biological control, you could introduce natural predators, but the problem is that has unintended consequences, because while they might kill the invasive species, now they're an invasive species. Enforce controls of ballast water, imported plants, and firewood movement. Firewood, you're not supposed to transport. I don't exactly know what the requirements are, but maybe 30 or 50 miles from where you live. Ballast water is referring to the water that you take into a boat. You have to be really careful about releasing that into a new river or lake. You probably have invasive species within that water, and then invasive species can get into lakes due to that. The last one we have is climate change. Remember, the cause is an increase in atmospheric CO2 and methane in the atmosphere. Why? Because, well, we're burning fossil fuels. And hopefully you can see, just by going through some of the ones on this list, a lot of these topics, even though it's like topic 2, topic 3, topic 4, they're interconnected. And that's how they're going to make the cluster. They're going to take different topics and incorporate them all into one cluster. So your brain has to be flip-flopping between different ideas continuously. We have impacts, shift in species range, coral bleaching, ocean acidification, increased frequency of extreme weather. Frequency just means amount or number. Ocean acidification, right here, this is because the amount of carbon in ocean is increasing. And then the pH, remember, 7 is neutral. And as you go to 6, 5, that means it's becoming more acidic. The lower the number, the more acidic it is. Things we could do: use renewable energy, create wildlife preserves, use drought-tolerant plants and sustainable farming practices, reforest degraded lands and restore wetlands to sequester, there's that word again. Remember, sequester means to trap carbon and buffer or reduce climate impacts. The last standard in this is kind of related to that, but also kind of not. It's looking at group behavior, individual and species, and if that increases your risk or your chance of survival and reproduction. When I taught this, I put this with evolution, but I can see it can fit into kind of either one of these buckets. It says evaluate the evidence. Whenever they say evidence, that means you will be taking something from the passage, from the model, from the data. For the role of group behavior on individual and species chances to survive and reproduce. They give you a lot of things: group and individual behavior, outcomes for group behavior, and then argument based on evolution. And then they provide a whole bunch of things. Flocking, so that's going to be when lots of lots of birds are together and how they are moving in a flock. What are the positives and negatives of that? Schooling, which is when the fish are all together, positive, negative of that. Herding is when larger organisms, let's say like an elephant, they all travel together. And then other cooperative behaviors like hunting. If you we watched in my class something about African wolves and how African dogs all work together in order to hunt. So they are social beings that work as a team in order to take down much bigger prey. Migrating and swarming. Swarming would be things like bees. So first one, fish school together to reduce predation and increase foraging efficiency. Foraging is looking for food. When a lot of fish are together in a group, predators are going around and they're like, oh my gosh, that's a huge fish. Meanwhile, it's just a lot of little fish together. That protects them because they're like, hey, that's big. I don't want to go over there. I'm scared of that. It also allows the fish to better look for food because there's lots of them, and increases like how well they are doing in terms of collecting that food. So it says it lowers the predation by 50%. In food detection, it increases by 30 to 40. Negative, it reduces predation, but also bigger predators are like, hey, look over there, I see you. You're really obvious because you're all together. So positive and negative, but even still it reduces predation, so that's a positive. Example number 2 is that elephants form herds to protect young and share knowledge and resources. Positive, herds led by older females have a higher calf survival rate. The calf's the baby. GPS tracking shows herds travel more efficiently to water sources during droughts. So when they're all working together, they're much more efficient. There's probably like a bossy elephant that's like, we have to keep going, we cannot stop. And they get to the water source much better than if they were working alone. A big problem is human interference. As I already mentioned with the ivory tusks, humans are hunting those organisms in order to get the tusks, and then the oldest ones wind up dying, and they're the ones who are the most knowledgeable, and then that's going to be a negative because they can't protect their young or share the knowledge of resources. Just note that the questions for this standard will most likely be an example you're not familiar with. You will need to look through the evidence to support your answer. That doesn't mean you can't use background information that you know, but what I'm saying is anytime it says evidence, you have to go back through the passages and the models. Keep in mind that the evidence might not be on the same page that you are currently working on. You might have to go on that scavenger hunt I had mentioned earlier, where it might be the page, maybe even 2 pages before. Anywhere in the cluster is going to be fair game in order to find that evidence. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I will do my best to answer those questions.